Employers of Reddit, what was the worst way you ever saw somebody react to getting fired? I was a security officer at a large aerospace company, one that makes fighter jets and the decks they fly off of if you want to know. One guy got wind of his termination and got a large power drill and drilled holes in several aircraft skins. Now considering that these skins never cost less than $50,000 each, he did a lot of damage. They could not be salvaged, either. Another employee, who wasn't being fired but reassigned to another job, same pay etc., jumped off the top floor of a 5-story building. The security officer who was 50 feet away from his landing point took a stress retirement. He said he'd never forget that sound. I was managing a small cell phone store in a strip mall kind of place a few years back and only had a couple employees under me. This one guy would come in late all the time, generally put no effort in, etc., and I basically laid down the law with him after a couple weeks and told him to shape up or get fired. He got better. For like a week. Then showed up late again. I don't mean like 5 minutes late. I mean like 2 hours late. He gave me some bull's excuse. I warned him and told him I'd fire him next time he showed up more than 5 minutes late. He told me to stop being so uptight and to get the stick out of my butt. So I told him to get himself out of my store. He walks out of the store, goes out to his car, gets a baseball bat out of the trunk, walks over to my car, and proceeds to basically smash the ever-living crap out of my car. Now this little strip mall is literally right across the street from the police station. So as soon as he grabbed the bat, I called the local PD. They come over within probably 90 seconds and arrest him. Fantastic response time, but not good enough. I drove a half decent car at the time worth around $7k, and the car was basically totaled. I couldn't believe how much havoc he wreaked on that car in 90 seconds. Smashed every window, both headlights, fricked up the hood fenders, broke my spoiler in half. It was astonishing. Long story short, the guy ended up getting a felony charge and serving jail time, in addition to having to pay reparations. I ended up getting cut a check from my insurance company and buying a newer model of the same car, but parked it around the back so customers' employees wouldn't know what kind of car I had. Something like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. TLDR. Fired a guy for chronic lateness bad attitude. He destroyed my car with a baseball bat in the parking lot across the street from the police station and got arrested convicted of a felony. Creative director wasn't fired, but was told by HR that people complained he wasn't there enough, so he had to start coming in 5 days a week. He was granted working 3 days a week due to some medical condition, but only saw him a couple times a month. Instead of agreeing, he went through the office looking for who tattled on him, started assaulting said tattler, and was escorted off premises by police and promptly fired. This was at a well-known children's toy company. Bonus: when they were looking for a new creative director, apparently he put his name in thinking that they would rehire him and asked for a raise. Whoa, judging by the fact that he tried to get rehired, he sounds just a slight bit delusional. I caught the assistant manager absent from the store while clocked in. I asked the girl working the front counter and she said that this bee was leaving for several hours of every single shift, but claimed she was clocking out. Would have fired her either way for leaving without permission so often. But I went through and watched the video and checked her time cards and she was constantly leaving for hours without clocking out. I waited for her for almost an hour, and she showed back up right when her shift was supposed to end. I'm guessing to clock out and keep the charade up. I asked her what was up and she told me she had just left to give her sister a ride to work across town and that she must have somehow forgotten to clock out for it. I told her that I had been watching the videos, and she immediately looked at the other girl who had been working alone in her absence and slammed her fists down on the counter and called her a C. I told her that the other girl had actually tried to cover for her and was facing discipline herself. I asked for her keys and shirts and she claimed she didn't have any of it. I told her to go home and get it all immediately or she would be charged for it on her final check. She showed back up several hours later and after I had sent the other girl home and called in a friend to help me at the store. She walked in the door, called me a stupid but honky she isn't white, threw her shirts on the floor, and threw her keys across the store, scattering them. Then she started crying and called me a lying sack of crap and saying that her and her kids were going to go homeless because of me. I told her she shouldn't have cheated the company. That made her explode, knocking crap off the counter, screaming, threatening my family. Luckily the buddy I called in stepped between and handed her a note. She looked at him, ripped it in half, and dropped it as she walked out. When I picked up the note, it was a criminal trespass form he had filled out with her information and presented to her, essentially banning her from the property under threat of arrest. I'm frankly surprised that got her to leave, but whatever works, works. Good on you for covering for the other girl. I am not an employer, but this is kind of related. I was in a small supermarket buying some groceries after work and this customer asked someone over to help him with a self-service machine. The customer wasn't aggressive or rude and he just commented on the machine, "This dink things never work for me," in a joking manner or something like that. And the staff member went crazy, got in his face and was yelling, "Don't disrespect me bruv," and all this London wannabe gangster crap. Like completely went off the deep end. So the customer called over a manager, and this kid was still going off at the customer right in front of the manager. The customer walked out saying he was going to file a complaint. Then this kid starts saying to the manager that the customer was making it all up and he had done nothing wrong. Even thought he had been threatening the customer with violence in front of the manager. Then when the manager told his that he didn't believe him, the kid then threatened to stab the manager for not believing him. Sounds like London sure enough. Not an employer, but my boyfriend had a co-worker get fired for repeatedly just not showing up for work. They worked at a small chain gas station store type place that required all employees to wear a necklace with a small button to call police in emergencies. This necklace would only work within a 50 featuring radius of the store but could be used in any one of the 10 plus stores. Well, this guy keeps his necklace and decides to go out one day, driving slowly past each store while pressing the button. The police, being required to go, ended up showing up at every store until they realized what was going on. That's going to be very expensive for him. We let go one of our paramedics and she lost her crap in the middle of the office, cursing everyone out. She then directed her hate at the CEO whose door was shut but he has a window. He saw her pointing towards him not knowing why, so he smiled and waved. This did not help matters. She called him a Rumpelstiltskin looking mother sucker and slammed the door and smoked a joint in the parking lot. The most amusing one was the guy who said okay, went back to his desk and started taking calls again. Had to tell him we meant immediately. We had to fire an IT person. She was never ever at work. She would show up, go to the coffee shop, chill. The day came to hand her a termination letter. We'd go to her office and she wasn't there. We ended up handing her a pink slip in the coffee shop next door. What shocked us is that she was legit stunned that she was fired. We have a union, so it took like 3 years to fire her. She collected free money for 3 years and was stunned that she was fired. I've only ever had to fire 2 people in my time as HR for my company, and thank God for that because both went so badly. For some background, we have major policies and procedures in place to do everything right when it comes to letting people go. Poor work performance counseling, mediation, the whole shebang. Laws around that sort of thing here are very strict, and very much on the employee's side. So as an employer you have to tread very carefully when gearing up to fire someone. The first guy we let go was a developer. Something that should have taken him 3 or 4 days was taking him a month, even though he had the paper behind his name to prove his skill set. He was also hella lazy, falling asleep in meetings, coming in late, leaving early, etc. So after 2 PWP counseling sessions with no improvement, we terminated his contract. He turned around and tried to sue us by taking us to the CCMA, but with the mountains of evidence we had against him, even the CCMA representative was on our side, which almost never happens. He ended up backing down after we threatened to sue him back for the cost of his recruitment fees, but that was a lot of wasted time and effort preparing for court with him. The second guy we let go was a salesperson. Dude was a nice enough guy, but terrible at his job. He didn't make a single sale in his first 3 months, so we started the PWP counseling with him as well. Gave him as much help as we could. Everyone from every department was offering a hand, but he just couldn't get his crap together. The next few months he didn't even hit 50% of his target. After 3 PWPs and extending his sales cycle so he could make target, we gave him notice and let him go. He went off at my boss, the CEO, in the meeting, going on about how we've ruined his life and we are taking food out of his kids' mouths, how he's going to make rent now, basically making it really personal. My poor boss, a big strong guy that I've known for the past 8 years, was almost in tears. He felt so guilty. I just told the guy to GTFO. I'm sorry, if you want to be a provider for your kids, you have to be able to do your job. He hasn't tried to take us to the CCMA yet. I'm just waiting for the notice. He'd be pretty stupid to try it though. It weighed on my boss for a long time afterwards. TLDR. I don't want to ever have to fire anyone again. It's a crappy job. The fired employee punched me in the side of the head while my back was turned, then proceeded to kick me repeatedly with his steel toe boots for over a minute before he was pushed off me. This was in the middle of a warehouse in front of others at lunchtime. I went to the emergency room and miraculously had no injuries or sign of concussion, outside of a burst blood vessel in my eye and black and blue splotches all over. He was high on pills that he later admitted he didn't even know what was in them. He was fired because an hour earlier he threatened me and then said he knew where my house was and my kids. He wasn't a psychopath, but he had a serious drug problem, and that was the last straw. He's also one of those guys that was incredibly smart, but was raised by relatives and grew up in a country ghetto. I used to work at a fast food restaurant. This guy was caught stealing money from customers by essentially charging 50C to use EFT POS, which has no charge, by doing it in cash out. Remember how many times he does it and stops when he reaches $50? This might sound time consuming, but 8-hour shift on cashier, it's pretty quick to rack up. Customer won't notice 50C extra charge and the tills are never down. Smart scheme. Until he got caught. He lost his crap because he thought they wouldn't be able to fire him because he isn't stealing from the store, blah blah blah. He rips off his uniform, storms out the store, turns around and says frick you, good luck cleaning this up, and pull the lever on the anti-fire mechanism, filling the entire store with this foam that puts out massive fires. Basically, if the store is going to burn down, kill someone, you pull it. $20,000 cleanup. All stock ruined. The store took him to court, and being a multi-billionaire company with some very good friends who happen to be layers, I assume he lost. He probably stole around $500 over a month and cost him tens of thousands. So stupid. Can't get blood from a stone. They probably bankrupted him, but unlikely he could ever afford the full cost. Not fired, but as a line cook. I was working on Saturday night in the middle of the dinner rush. Someone asked where the dishwasher was. Sure enough, he had enough, took off his apron and walked out. You want to frick up a restaurant? Believe it or not, taking the dishwasher in the middle of a Saturday service is a real good way to frick them over. Christmas Day, busiest day of the year, and our dishwash machine broke down. Me, the dishwasher, had to wash everything by hand. I was sent home after 15 hours, but I was nowhere near finished. I was so goddamn tired. This rather sad woman who worked at the gas station I managed didn't take her firing, or anything, too well. Fricked up priorities and such. When we hired her, she seemed like an upbeat person, but in the first week I find out she was asking customers for money, and even went home with a customer after her shift. She would talk to certain customers for several minutes while a line was forming, and although she was told multiple times to shorten her conversations, she persisted. She was the type of person to lack the ability to absorb what was being told to her. Eventually it was just too much, and I got clearance from the owner to fire her. So I call her up saying she has to come in for a talk, and she obviously has a clue what's going on, insisting I tell her right now. She kept refusing to come in, to the point I have to turn to the owner, sitting at an adjacent desk, and tell him that he needs to talk to her and she won't let me get a word in. The owner gets on the phone with her and tells her she needs to come in and talk about her future here, it's not working out, something or other, and she just blurts out, "Oh frick you butthole," and hangs up the phone. B comes back to get her last check on Friday even though we mailed it out, and acts just as bubbly as ever, apologizing and saying how she was having a bad day. But later that night she comes back to use the ATM, and when she realizes there's no money in her account she starts beating and punching the machine. She has a general breakdown. Police were called. She fought and had to be tased. It was a mess. Just fire her on the phone. I would be P to come across town for a beating just to be fired. Not everyone has a car. I'm not an employer, but I witnessed an ex-coworker reacting really badly to getting fired. I work at a grocery store. My ex-coworker got into an argument with a cashier. He ended up throwing a bottle at the cashier's head, causing her to bleed. She called the store owner, who fired my ex-coworker on the spot. How does he react? My ex-coworker goes to a nearby phone and activates the paging system. Over the pager, he delivers this message to everyone in the store. To everyone who was mean to me, I hope the devil eats your freaking souls. This was during opening hours with customers in the store. Afterwards, he takes off his shirt and begins skateboarding in the store. He proceeds to knock down as many items as he can. Meanwhile, the store manager is screaming "Get out!" After getting told the police was being called, my ex-coworker left the store. Since I know my ex-coworker outside of work, I asked him why he reacted the way he did. After letting him cool down a few days later, he insists that he quit because everyone, especially management, was mistreating him. Make of that what you will. TL. DR. After getting fired, ex-coworker uses pager and says weird crap. Proceeds to vandalize grocery store. Classic shad. Once a guy got fired from a supermarket I was at. He was a weird guy who worked part-time while he worked in a slaughterhouse. He got fired because he just would drift off for like 20 minutes in the back just sitting around doing nothing. When he got sacked, well, he didn't get his contract renewed after his initial training month. He acted like he knew it was coming. He just said I'm going to the bathroom, and my boss who was with him was a little taken aback but was like yeah fine. After about 20 minutes he's still in there and my boss goes to check on him. He was just sitting in there having a wank. The cubicle door was shut but my boss swung it open revealing Slaughterhouse Tom taking care of his own meat. Apparently my boss just walked out and 5 minutes later the guy come out and left never to be seen again. Hacking and whacking and slashing. It was reported that the fired employee put nails on angles under his manager's tires so that when he backed out they'd puncture all 4 of them. Never do 4. Really gets covered by insurance. Do 2. 1 more than the spare, and likely under the cost of the deductible, so it'd be pointless to report to insurance anyways, if you're ever compelled to do so. Not an employer, but a great reaction from the person doing the firing. I was either fired or laid off for no real reason from a major financial firm. It's been years and I'm still not sure. I saw it coming from a mile away. They just didn't like me and had been trying to find a reason to get rid of me for about 6 months prior. Through an odd series of events, I was able to predict almost to the day that I was either going to get fired or laid off. On that day, I was called into the super senior manager's office. I knew what was coming, so I quietly left my desk and took my coat, my bag, and packed the 2 or 3 things that I wanted to keep from my desk. I was huge relief that I was never going to have to go back there again. I get into his office and he noticed that I had brought stuff with me and had my building badge in hand ready to give to him. He said something along the lines of, "You brought your coat." As soon as I walked in, I smiled and said it's a bit chilly out today. Then he told me I was being let go and cited some completely stupid reason. I smiled and said something like, "Thanks for putting up with me for the last couple years." Shortly after that, it sank into him that I knew it was coming from a mile away. This didn't sit well with him at all. He then proceeded to start yelling and screaming and slamming his hands on the table in the room. He slammed his hand on the table so hard in the room that he was trying to hide the fact that he hurt himself for the rest of the conversation. I was relieved I would never have to go back there and trying not to laugh. About a year later that same guy friended me on LinkedIn. Go figure. Kill N with kindness. Fricks with their heads. I was suspending someone over a racist comment they made. Basically, we always suspended for 24 hours before terming in that company to ensure we had all of our I's dotted. Anyways, while suspending her she told me that she was very angry, but not to worry, she wouldn't bring a gun to shoot me the next day. The next day when she showed up and we were terming her, my boss and I argued over who had to walk in front. Luckily nothing happened except a lot of screaming, but it was interesting. Jesus, call the fricking police and have them on hand. You're playing pretty fast and loose with your dang life. I've got a few, but I think it's a toss-up between two. One guy was upset at a co-worker. For a variety of reasons, none of them work related. Gets fired, walks out to the parking lot, shoots on co-worker's car. I guess it had been festering for a while as he was pretty upset. Cops arrived as the guy was finishing up. He was dragging his butt across the hood. 2-second guy was using his time manning a public service desk to further his exploration of furry culture in general and flexing his writing chops putting together furry fanfiction. When confronted, the guy didn't seem to see anything wrong with what he was doing and went on a rather long tirade about the puritanical masses, closed-minded idiots, freedom of expression, how he was being oppressed, blah blah blah. Security was called. He spit at them. I'm told things got interesting during the phone hearing for his unemployment and that he tried several times to get a lawsuit going. A guy that was fairly new, only been there about a month, on a job I was working on, drove a company vehicle into a light pole and then tested positive for M on a post-incident drug test. I had to deal with it being the unofficial supervisor, as the supervisor was away that week. In a ho, I had to drive him back to the airport to fly home. The job was at a remote fly-in fly-out mine site. He was super chill about it, didn't care at all. Within about 500 meters of driving he had already fallen asleep and slept the whole drive back to the airport. When we got there I felt sort of sorry for him as the only flight they could organize for him was almost 4 hours later, so I shouted him lunch. That was a bad idea as I crap you not, it cost me like $38. He had a meat pie, pork and gravy roll, fried rice, spring rolls, samosas, curry puffs, coke, water, caramel slice. It just went on and on. He seriously ate like 5,000 calories of airport food. I guess I am partly to blame for what happened next, as I just assumed that if you had only recently started working with a company and then you crashed a car and caused $20,000 damage to it whilst high on M and failed a drug test, it wouldn't need to be specifically explained to you that your services were no longer required by the company. Oops. The week after he turned up at our workshop like nothing had happened, and then completely lost his crap when HR explained to him he was no longer employed. Ran around pouring water in the printers and tipping over desks, kicked holes in people's doors, stood out in the car park calling out people to fight him, and then ripped a big burnout when he finally left. Well, we know what he was doing right before showing up. I managed a coffee shop and had an employee who would come in stoned every day. Now, this is Colorado, so it wasn't too odd for this to happen. But then he got brazen and started bringing pure canna butter in, eating up a piece of banana bread, and just spreading it on like it was nothing, which always seemed disgusting to me anyways. I had to write him up a couple of times and when it finally came time for me to have to fire him, he seemed entirely amicable, handed over his keys, and walked out. When I came in the next morning it was sheer horror. He had copied his key and came in overnight and proceeded to cover everything with honey. The touchscreen registers, the computer in the office, the espresso machines, the bakery cases, the tables and chairs, and, worst of all, throughout all of the files in the filing cabinet. Honey does not clean up easily, particularly ones on paper. Fortunately for us, we had security cameras everywhere so it was all recorded, but the week that followed was heck. I still hate honey. I spent 2 summers working in the kitchen at a children's summer camp. The chef in this story also worked those 2 specific summers. He was an alcoholic who spent the first year hitting on our sous chef. The next summer he was worse. He was actively trying to pick up the underage kitchen staff, camp counselors, even some of the kids attending the teen week. It was a camp geared towards hockey training and surfing, so 1 or 2 weeks each summer was dedicated to teens attending the camp. We kept huge jugs of orange juice in the walk-in that we would put out in the mornings for the kids to have with breakfast. He was mixing vodka in some of them and drinking from them while he was at work. Almost every girl on staff in that kitchen complained about him, including me. One of the managers said if I wasn't willing to go to the police then they weren't willing to fire him. Then our 15-year-old dishwasher spoke to the HR person about the sexual harassment going on and they actually started looking into it. He got fired with a day's notice to pack up his cabin and leave the property. He smashed up and totally trashed the inside of his cabin and threw a bunch of crap around the kitchen. He's also in jail now. Pretty sure it's for sexual assault of a minor. Also, after he was fired, one of our servers accidentally put out one of his vodka OJ jugs from the fridge, which he neglected to take with him. That was a crap show, but none of us got in trouble because by then management knew who was to blame. She was told she was fired when she arrived that morning and to wait in the lobby while her stuff was being collected, and to her there, she snuck around and got into the building through a different entrance and proceeded to lock herself into her office. She then started calling and emailing everyone higher up that she knew to call in some favors. Meanwhile, several people are pounding on her door telling her to open up. Police are called. By the time the police arrived, she had apparently called in the right favor, because someone called our boss, and she was no longer fired. Crap, I'm not even mad. That is hilarious. This happened to my grandfather when he used to work asset protection for a tech company in Ohio. Many years ago the company was letting an employee go because he kept stealing office supplies, coming in consistently late, and had anger issues that he took out on other employees. This was especially bad because he also was a bodybuilder at the time. Eventually the company had enough and it was time to cut the employee loose. My grandfather was called into the manager's office to make sure there was no funny business during the firing and to make sure things didn't escalate to a bad point. The employee was called into the office and he took his sweet time, of course. Once he came in, the meeting took place, and after about a 10-minute talk to try and save his job, the company decided to let him go, and when they did his face got red and he sprung out of his chair. Thanked the manager for the opportunity to work there, then from what I understand he passive-aggressively stormed out of the office. Here's the kicker. Later that night my grandfather went home to take care of baby me and he saw on the news that a man died outside of their residence in a pool of blood. He later found out it was the same man they fired that day. The employee had gone home and punched through the small glass window on the side of his front door and the glass cut his wrist clean open and he bled out in 2 minutes. Poor guy. What a way to go and what a legacy to leave behind. TLDR. Man got fired and died later that day after punching window. Sucks when the worst day of your life is also the last day of your life. Long ago, one of my first jobs ever was working third shift at a security monitoring company. We had a trainee that started screaming at the top of her lungs in fear and ran out of the room over seeing a fruit fly. She came back 10 minutes later saying she is scared to death of bugs and can't work in an environment like that. We asked what she would do during an emergency. Security emergency she would be monitoring. And she said she would still run out of the room until the bug is taken care of by someone, even if she needed to call someone to get it taken care of. That morning we told our boss what happened and he told the trainee that he would have to let her go since we can't have someone that leaves the office over something small when a medical fire hold-up alarm goes off. She proceeds to start yelling and pulls out the crazy that we are only letting her go because she was a woman and is black. The president of the company was a woman. The vice president was a black woman. Half of the staff was black. Over half were women. She later filed a complaint against our company over her allegations so that she could receive unemployment. The company ended up just giving her unemployment to make it go away. Omarosa. On his last day returned his laptop to the IT department and said he accidentally ran over it in his driveway. Judging by the look of it, he accidentally ran over it a few times. It was the first person I ever fired. An 18-year-old college dropout who lasted 1.5 shifts and was obviously cutting a whole lot of drama with her, and I want dealing with that. So I tell her that we're releasing her from her probationary period, and I swear her head popped open and a shining ball of crazy came flying out. She goes on to say she hates her job and wants to slap a customer with a cookie. I ask her why. She told me she loved food service in her interview, and she said she knows the only way to get anywhere is by lying. and she learned that from her father who makes 6 figures a year, so excuse me if she doesn't take my word for it. And if she told me in her interview that she dropped out of college because of her pill addiction, then I never would have hired her. Really, it reminded me of a bad breakup in high school more than anything. After she finally left the room, my senior manager who had helped me break the news to her turns to me and says, "That was the worst reaction I've ever gotten, by far." Fired a new hire 20-year-old apprentice at my hangar after he backed a golf cart into an aircraft and didn't own up to it, even with 12 witnesses. He left the building and then came back with his mother. They refused to leave the hangar until we gave him another chance. I went over all of his second chances that I gave him and told her to GTFO. She picked up an oil filter off a table and threw it at me. However, the oil filter had oil in it and splattered all over the two of them. I asked them to leave again, and she called the cops. The officer that came was one of the local airport rats and promptly arrested both of them for trespassing and tampering with aircraft on federal property. I was subpoenaed a few months later to meet a judge for a statement. I had forgotten about the whole thing by then, so I went in kind of blind. The judge was her husband, and while I was in his chambers tried to demand that I give his stepson another chance. Not an employer myself, but I remember back in my college days, a librarian at our campus was fired after what sounded like a pretty nasty argument with his boss. The guy ended up collecting his personal items and almost looked like he was going to leave the library with little to no incident. That is until he took a detour to the toilet, which was just adjacent the main entrance. About 10 minutes later, the guy runs out of the toilet with his box of stuff in one hand and a handful of freshly produced crap on the other. He then just started throwing crap all over his former colleagues and boss while screaming profanities. We were all ducking under our tables trying to escape the crap storm, but the guy never attacked students. He wiped his crappy hands on the library's white walls and just walked out carrying his box like nothing happened. We later learned that he also wrote a big "frick you" in the stalls with his crap. Most accurate and literal use of the word crap storm I have ever seen. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.